If you like what you watch, then don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates on The More Show. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new weekly television and radio shows.
Comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the views of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliates or sponsors.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The More Show, which is sponsored by the UFO Matrix magazine. On today's show, I'm about to be joined by our guest, Dr. Charles Traymont. Now, Dr. Charles Traymont received his MD at New York Medical College in 1962 and had a successful career of some 32 years. In addition to his prominent medical career, he also achieved the rank of colonel in the United States Air Force, serving in the Vietnam War and Operation Desert Storm. At present, Dr. Charles Traymont devotes his life to the research and practice of healing through hypnotherapy and past life regression. Dr. Charles Traymont, welcome to the show.
It's my pleasure, Kevin.
So, Charles, you served in the Vietnam War and the Desert Storm War. How did you get into the military?
Well, when I was an intern, I was drafted along with many other interns during that time. The Vietnam War was raging, but my hospital my papers had gone through for my residency program, so that they were able to get me out of that draft. And so I went through the residency, and my good friend who interned with me went into the Army. At any rate, he came into the residency with me, and then I finished, and I knew it was still coming as the war was still on.
Yeah.
So I hired out as a chief resident, and sure as dickens, I got redrafted through the Air Force this time. So, and I was gone for a couple of years, and then when I came back, I resigned my commissions. I really needed to get into practice, but then back in the 80s, I became a little bit burned out in practice, and I felt I needed some more interest in my life and camaraderie that I really enjoyed. So I joined the reserve, and comes Desert Storm, and I was gone again. So,
Right.
Anyway, it was interesting, but I enjoyed that part of my life too. But it all proves that my feet are pretty firmly planted on the ground. I'm not a flighty individual, and so what I got into when I got into reincarnation and past life regression therapy. People look twice at my credentials in terms of, well, this guy is not a screwball. He's
Yeah.
he's firmly planted here. I made full colonel, almost made brigadier.
Now, you've delivered some 5,000 babies into this world. Now, that must have been amazing to sort of...
Pretty close to that.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting. It was very thrilling and very stressful. But I must admit, I'm just as thrilled with the outcome of many of my therapeutic sessions as I am delivering babies. Change people's lives. Sure.
Why did you retire from surgery then?
Well, I had it was after about 32, 33 years, I had this cervical arthritis in my neck, which became symptomatic, and I was in Ohio where it's cold and wet a good part of the time.
Yeah.
I would have stuck it out, except I was getting a little concerned because the symptoms were progressing to the point where I might become weak. And in the middle of the night, when I'm doing an emergency cesarean section, I'm usually alone with the nurse, and I've got to have plenty of strength to dislodge a baby's head from deep in the pelvis, especially if it's what we call cephalopelvic disproportion, where the pelvis is really tight. And I didn't need to see a problem like that developing, so I just decided the best part of valor here would be to throw in the towel. And then I moved to a warmer, dry climate where my neck was fine. It's amazing. So I'm in Vegas, and I thought, well, I might as well thrust myself into regression therapy full time. But I need to do some research, so I started lecturing at the university for Raymond Moody's classes on consciousness, and I pulled in hundreds of volunteers and ended up doing research for a good 4 years. And then I was compelled to write my book.
So how did your book sort of evolve then?
Well, I had so much material, and I started putting it all together, and that was a horrendous job. But I thought, my gosh, this stuff is so fascinating, and and I'm learning all the time. I mean, there's a surprise around every corner, and I got into a spirit releasement situation by accident because I ended up regressing a spiritual attachment to an individual. So I vowed to do a lot more reading on that subject, and since that time, I'm afraid I'm in that full time too, because you're talking a good 70% of individuals who are having these situations. So I find out that people's problems are either related to past life memories which have surfaced and are causing phobias and overreactions, or they're due to spiritual attachments who are causing all kinds of havoc in their life.
Now on your cover, Charles, it states Gnostic healing for the 21st century. What is Gnostic healing?
Well, what we accomplish by guiding the subject into the mental processes that lead to healing through this regression work that we do is strikingly similar to the beliefs of this very ancient spiritual movement, which was called Gnosticism. That's derived from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowing. And that particular movement preceded and followed the life of Christ. These individuals had very little regard for organized religion. They believe that there should be a direct perception of God. In other words, they believe that introspection, contemplation, intuition, these things would lead to a knowing, which would then allow them to attain spiritual truths and then know their divine origin, know God, by direct perception, not faith. In other words, they're saying they don't need a priest or minister, they don't need a middleman, they just need to be a direct connection to their creator. But what's even really more fascinating is they believed and used the power of the mind and the power of positive thinking. In fact, they were even aware of how the subconscious mind influences the conscious mind. And Carl Jung, when he did some research in the Gnostics, just blew his mind when he found out. He thought, geez, these guys are way ahead of us. And some of them were healers. The Essenes were one of such groups, and the Dead Sea Scrolls were thought to be documents from the Essenes. So what it boils down to is communing with one's higher self through hypnosis, and witnessing many incarnations gives one the rare opportunity to relive these past life experiences and gain wisdom without many years of conscious introspection. Hypnosis and hypnotic past life regression is a shortcut to gnosis. To spend years doing meditative situations in 1 or 2 sessions, you know who you are. You know that you are this eternal being, that you live forever, and that nothing can ever destroy you. And it gives you one heck of a perspective to face life and death.
Would you say, though, Charles, that people in general never ask the questions, who am I? What is this life all about? Where do I go after this life?
The public is usually so busy with superficial stuff that goes on a day-to-day basis. And they're entertained constantly, with TV and this and that. And, that they don't ever really take a few minutes to introspect, except when something bad happens. Some tragic thing in their life occurs, and all of a sudden they start asking those questions. And it's much better to be enlightened ahead of time.
Yeah.
That's my philosophy.
Yeah, to know that you are eternal and, life carries on, yeah. So you're ahead of the game then, I suppose.
Well, when I was in practice and I first got into this, I began utilizing this for terminal patients that I had. Patients that I operated on had cancer that was, untreatable, and they only had a matter of months to live. But this gave them a feeling of being eternal and changed their whole attitude on facing death. I thought that was well worth it.
Yeah. Charles, for our listeners who aren't sure what past lives are, would you just be able to describe briefly what you mean by past lives?
Well, when we take somebody into a past life, what I often do is I'm taking people back, and when I use the subconscious under deep hypnosis, I ask the subconscious to take the individual back to the cause of a particular problem. And oftentimes that problem is something that happened in the past of the present lifetime, or it can be in the past from a past lifetime. And when you get into these past lifetimes, these individuals are truly there. I mean, they experience everything. All their senses are being used. They smell the smells, hear the sounds, and so on. And their consciousness is there. You have a dual awareness. You have the consciousness of that moment in that lifetime, and you have the present-day consciousness observing. And that's the beauty of the therapeutic effect, because the subconscious has this, what I call subconscious cell memory. It's the memory of every moment of every life you've ever lived. And on a day-to-day basis, we're constantly triggering these memories to the surface. And usually those are mundane, rather unemotional memories. But what they do is form our attitude, our feelings about everything in life. However, if a memory, when it's filed away, is filed away with a very strong emotion, such as in a way in which you died, when that memory comes to the surface because of something triggering that memory in your present life, it brings all the emotions and sometimes the pain with it. And it's striking. Causes people to have these overreactions or phobias. So, at any rate, what you do is you're observing this through the conscious mind. The conscious mind is very rational, and the conscious mind is being objective, and it's also making a distinction of time, whereas the subconscious does not. Subconscious looks at it as if it just happened, and it may have happened, several thousand years ago.
Yeah.
So the conscious mind makes decision and says to itself something along the lines of, this happened a long time ago, why am I suffering, this is ridiculous, and it's able to release the effect, and bingo, these people are cured. And sometimes it may require forgiveness of individuals who maybe stoned you to death in a lifetime or beheaded you or whatever. And that may give you a little stronger sense of resolution of the problem.
Okay.
But for the most part, they're able to release the effect, and they walk away without the weight of this on their shoulders anymore.
Sure. Now you're using hypnotherapy to obviously heal people by going into the past life or future life. But where did your interest in hypnotherapy start? When did you start regressing patients then?
Well, I started getting into hypnosis is right after I took a course right before Desert Storm. When I got back, then I started utilizing hypnosis in my practice for deliveries, for relief of pain, hyperemesis, just various things that I would find really good use for, and also for pre- and post-operative situations. But then I started reading books on regression, and there was just a few around, Brian Weiss, Dick Sutphin, a few of them to mention, Roger Wolger. These are different authors that had gotten into it in the early days. And I was fascinated, and I could see the potential in healing here. So I then began doing this with patients who were willing to do this. And I would do this usually after my usual hours or while I was waiting for somebody in labor because my office was adjacent to the hospital. And that's where I gained my early experience. But the thing that really blew me away was one of my earliest patients came to me with phobias and nightmares that woke her up screaming. And I was able to cure her of all these things by taking her back to about 7 lifetimes, I think. And and like the nightmares were due to her being a druid high priestess doing human sacrifices. And I thought, geez, that would give me nightmares
God,
too.
yeah.
But she was able to release all these things beautifully so. And she even exhibited xenoglossy, which was speaking foreign languages unknown, like she was speaking ancient Gaelic.
Incredible.
And I was able to validate historically like 6 of her 7 lifetimes. And the other one didn't lend itself to that, but I thought, that's amazing. So this kind of catapulted me into this whole area.
Sure.
And really excited me. So, and from that time on, I've been able to validate many lifetimes.
Yeah.
So, a firm believer in reincarnation. I think that is exactly the way things are. I don't think we'll ever know how it all works until we're in those dimensions ourselves, until we leave this physical world. But I'm sure we're getting little bits of glimpses here and there on how it works, and it's extremely fascinating. It's a great sense of justice, karma is, and so on. So, yeah, I've become passionate about it, Kevin.
Did you always believe in reincarnation? I mean, because it wasn't for there was a period, wasn't there?
I was very conventional, position, and I hear about reincarnation. I think to myself, that sounds cool, to come back. So I was raised Catholic, and it's considered a no-no. It's heresy, and so on. But then when I got into this and I started doing some research, I find out that guess who took reincarnation out of Christianity?
Who?
It was a Roman emperor,
right?
A guy named Justinian in the middle of the 6th century, and it was out of political reasons,
Control.
And the Pope even boycotted that ecumenical council, but he slipped it right through and with his own bishops and was able to get it passed, and now it's set in stone. So I don't feel so bad.
Yeah, things are taken out.
The Roman emperors, they yielded. They had big sticks that they were flying around all the time. So, but it certainly wasn't the word of God.
What about people who've sort of had transplants and they take on this sort of character of the other donor? I mean, you must have come across that as well. That aspect of
the idea of heart and kidney transplants was of great interest to me because, the recipients definitely are picking up personality traits of the donor. There was a case of a strapping big construction worker who had a kidney from an older woman, and within like 8-9 months, he was crocheting and knitting. I mean, it's kind of weird stuff. But also the case of the 8-year-old girl who was murdered, that was rather interesting and fascinating. Her heart went to a 9-year-old girl who had very lucid dreams about the murder, so much so she identified the killer and they found him and put him away. Now that tells you that information was infused and somehow assimilated into human tissue, and it was definitely there. So the way I think it works is your subconscious memory that I mentioned is within the soul, and when the soul leaves the body, the subconscious memory is with it. And when it infuses into a new body, somehow the memory assimilates and integrates into that particular body. In these transplant situations, you have a human tissue from that body that was still living, maintaining that information, regardless of what organ it is, and somehow assimilated into this other body. And the memory became their memory. So, like I said, we're not going to know how it all works. But
No. So you
little pieces of the puzzle.
So you believe it's in the cells of the tissue as well as.
Well, I think it has to go into the most subatomic particle within each cell, and it's like a hologram situation, a holographic memory.
But do you also believe that the soul carries all the past life memories as well?
Oh yeah, no, I think it starts with the soul, but I think when it infuses into a physical being, it just does that, infuses into the body, into every subatomic particle within it. And that's why I think certain areas of the body are very susceptible to certain things. Like one particular patient had met somebody, a new client in business, for the first time and immediately hated this guy's guts. Couldn't stand him. And at the same time that he met him, as he came into the room and looked in this guy's eyes, he had this tremendous discomfort in his abdomen. And he was worked up for days and weeks, and they couldn't find anything wrong with him. But simply taking him back to the cause of this problem, he went back to a medieval battle. And this other individual during a battle is running him through with a sword right in that spot in the abdomen. And he's looking into his eyes as he's dying. Well, now he's looking into his eyes again. This guy, is reminiscent from that lifetime. And we call that soul recognition. But what it did is it triggered these memories, and it brought the pain with it. And again, once conscious mind sees what happened and understood it, and did a little bit of forgiving, he was fine, no longer any pain, and understood the whole situation.
Right, okay. That's a fascinating story. So Charles, would you say that the higher self and the subconscious mind, are we saying the same word as the soul? Is that how you class those two?
You can call it your consciousness, your soul, your higher mind. I mean, some people sit there and divide it up into segments and so on. And, you can use all kinds of terminology, but you're pretty much saying the same thing.
And Charles, when the patient's under regression, how do you channel the information out of the patient? Where's that information coming from?
What I do is I take them up under deep hypnosis to their higher self, which is all done hypnotically, and that's the area wherein their wisdom resides. And then I have them call forth their spirit guide, and I'm convinced that all of us have spirit guides. And these are spiritual beings who are there for our benefit and have unconditional love for us and help guide us through life. And I'm actually channeling through the patient to the guide, and the guide answers through the patient. And that form of channeling is very, very, very real. Some of these guides are unbelievably protective of the patient. For instance, they will tell me point blank, it's not time to go back to that particular lifetime or the cause of this particular problem because the patient isn't ready for it. Like I had an individual who was burned at the stake for being a witch, and the guy just said, this is not the time. But later, as we advanced and did much more work with her, she was prepared. After seeing herself in many lifetimes and understanding the process better, she was prepared. And then they gave me permission to do it. And they're very humanistic because they were in their own human body at one time, and many times they've had lives with the particular patient. Very much interest in them.
Okay. And would you say that at the point of death, if it's going to be a painful death, for example, would you say the soul's pulled from the body? I mean, what would be the process of going through pain?
If you're talking about individuals doing an out-of-body situation, sometimes the soul fragments. For instance, if like a little girl is being molested, and it's so horrific for her that part of her consciousness, or her soul, if you want to call it that, fragments, and is on the other side of the room observing in a non-threatening way. In other words, is not emotionally or physically involved, but it's just observing. And sometimes that fragment doesn't return, in which case we do this process of soul retrieval and try to join the fragment to the soul again. But sometimes those fragments also attach to other individuals, and those other individuals are affected by these fragments. And so that's all part of the releasement process that I go through with individuals. But see, I utilize the spirit guide to monitor the situation and tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And I ask them about, is there any foreign energy present? And if there is, then we identify what this energy is and get rid of it.
And this would be the spirit...
Not for the patient's benefit.
Sure, and this is the spirit attachment that you mentioned earlier on.
Spirit attachments, there's all types.
And but just before you carry on there, I mean, can they affect people's lives from, I don't know, from smoking to sexual dysfunctions?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
it's not. I mean, that's not a way though for the patient not to take responsibility for their own problems. No.
By the same token, when you die, your addictions go with you. If you're a drug addict, a smoker, somebody who's addicted to alcohol and so on, those things go with you. One of the earliest cases I had of releasement was a young girl I was doing for smoking, simple thing for smoking, using hypnosis. And she started smoking because her mother had committed suicide by pouring lighter fluid on herself in the shower and setting herself ablaze. So it was a horrific scene for her. So, at any rate, she said, that's when I started smoking. I thought to myself, well, I'd start smoking then too. That's pretty bad stuff. But I get halfway through the session, and all of a sudden she yells out, my mother doesn't want me to stop smoking. And then I found out later that her mother was, a chain smoker. Mother joined her, and I think one of the main reasons was because of the nicotine situation. And so she became a smoker. But after sending her mother to the light and so on, and she was able to release that problem.
Yeah. So are you saying a lot of habits that we can't explain, or maybe are not proud of to admit to even anyone except for ourselves? Do you think that?
And drug addicts, oftentimes they overdose and then bingo, they're gone.
Yeah.
And if they hook into somebody, that somebody becomes a drug addict also.
Would you say though that could be a spirit attachment on that drug addict as such? That's getting the same sort of high as the user's getting.
They don't get the same effect, from what I understand, but they think they're getting a effect of some sort. And just like the reasons they join are varied, and when I question them, and I channel to them just like I do to the spirit guide, they have many reasons. Sometimes it could be a lover from a past lifetime. Sometimes it could be a parent, just because of compassion, for their child. Any number of reasons. But they don't do them any favors because their ailments, for instance, are imprinted into this new body. In other words, you have a spiritual attachment. If they have an ulcer, you get an ulcer, because they imprint these illnesses on you. So they're not doing you any favors from that standpoint. Also, many of their desires become your desires. So it throws a big monkey wrench into the karmic situation.
People listening to this show right now who feel that they may have this problem, are they best to seek out people like yourselves to go see to get help?
Well, I'm sure there are some individuals who do spirit releasements. I like the fact that I just do the regression therapy, and then I do the spirit releasement as a necessary, needed thing to do, as long as you're going to do regression, because many times the problems aren't due to a past lifetime.
Okay.
And the first time I ran into this was by accident, because I think I told you one time I had regressed the attachment.
Wow.
And it dawned on me finally, when they were talking in third person terms regarding the patient.
Okay.
So at any rate, it's a very real thing, and a lot of people say you guys are all nuts, but it's very real, and I've cured lots of people from lots of problems. People who are psychotic, and I'm convinced if you have a good many attachments, and they're all going in different directions, and I think this is what many times causes people to get psychotic and all these mental illnesses.
Right. Okay.
I think a lot of psychiatrists are very superficial in their treatment and need to get deeper. And
Yeah.
I'm a believer in conventional medicine. I just don't believe it goes far enough. And when I give lectures to the physicians at the local hospital, I get into all this stuff, and I tell them that, guys, we were taught to treat the mind and the body, but we also have a soul, and that needs to be treated as well. That's the whole person.
Yeah. And how do they take you when you have these lectures?
I ended up regressing some of the doctors. So there's a few that are open-minded.
Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah. That must have...
But there are still many who are very conventional, you know.
Yeah,
They're just taught that way.
No, that's fair enough. Dark entities or discarded spirits, how would you describe them?
Okay, well, the discarnate spirits, they're disembodied spirits. They're an individual who dies and who declines going to the light, which is the afterlife. They kind of remain in the astral plane, which is the area between the light and earth. And in that astral plane, and like I said, they have various reasons for not going to the light. Could be a mother worried about her children, so she wants to be around and keep an eye on them. A lover who doesn't want to leave. Many reasons. And a lot of times it's confusion. People don't realize they're dead. Like if it was a horrific accident, you know, then they're just not sure. And so they hang around in the astral plane, and many times they will attach to individuals for, I don't know, the warmth of blood and human tissue or addictions or various reasons. And those particular earthbound spirits are, when they're present, and I use the spirit guide to tell me how many and so on, and then I have them step forward one at a time, and I kind of ask them, you know, what's your purpose in being here, and so on. They can understand, and I explain to them that they can also love somebody from the light, and that they need to continue on with their spiritual journey, and their journey is to again be one with the Creator. In order to do that, the soul needs to perfect itself, because it's an individual soul with just a spark of your Creator within you, but you are an individual, and in order to perfect yourself, you need to learn lessons. And there are many lessons, like love, compassion, patience, and so on, that need to be learned, and the best place to learn them would be the Earth, because the Earth is one heck of a challenge here. Life on other planets, and I've taken individuals to these other planets as well, usually nowhere the challenge that they are on Earth. Earth is a real tough place. And
boot
these
camp.
individuals learn those lessons well. And after they die and they're... What, Kevin?
I say it's like a boot camp, really, the Earth.
Well, yeah. And when the individual dies and they're in the afterlife and their spirit guide is kind of debriefing them, if you want to call it that, and asking them, what lesson did you need to learn? Why did you incarnate? And they lay out the lesson, and then I always ask the question, did you accomplish it? And many times they don't, in which case you have to repeat that lesson in another lifetime. We may have thousands and thousands of lifetimes to do these things, but it's important. Okay, so that's the earthbounds, and then you have the dark force entities. And William Baldwin I use a lot of his methodology. He did this stuff for like 20 years. He was a PhD and also a former dentist who got very much into spirit releasement, wrote a textbook on it, actually. But the dark forces, you know, this is the eternal battle of evil versus good that's haunted humanity ever since its beginning. These entities are nasty, and they're bent on your destruction, period. And I run into them all the time. I had a woman who was unbelievably into witchcraft and all kinds of bad stuff. And her boyfriend brought her in. And I ended up finally getting to her guide and said, you know, what are we up against? And he said thousands. You know?
Wow.
And I said, oh boy. So and the battle went on for like over an hour. And I never saw a spirit guide panic before, but this guy had actually screamed out, you know, there's too many of them, there's too many of them. I mean, this is crazy, this is happening. And I said, well, you know, do what you have to do. Call in reinforcements. I kind of use my military background.
Yeah.
I mean, it was getting crazy. But it went on for an hour, and finally the last one was taken to the light by Michael the Archangel. I call in all the big guns on this... spirit releasement. And a lot of people are probably thinking, oh, this guy's got to be daffy. This is very, very real. And the last one was gone, and I used the spirit guide to monitor it and tell me, and he says, you know, that's it, no more foreign energy present. And about 6 weeks after, I got an email from the boyfriend who said that, and the words were, I think he said, more than amazing. She has completely reverted to a normal individual. Because I guess she was going off the end for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I get these responses.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it?
It's gratifying.
Gratifying, yeah. Yeah, indeed.
Really good, yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, well, let's look at some past life cases that you've worked on. Just explain a couple, and try to include a famous case as well, because I'm sure there's something interesting about a famous case as well.
Well, when you say famous case, I call these high-profile individuals.
High profile, yes.
I had an individual, several years ago, who I took back to the cause of this pain. This guy had pain, and I saw him in another doctor's office. He had pain in the left buttocks, I think it was. And took him back to the cause, and all of a sudden now he's in a football game. And the year is 1911, and he was just tackled, and he's laying on the field, and he's hurting. And the pain's going right up to that left buttock area, and I'm thinking, okay, we're on the right track here. And so I said, what's your name? He says, Jim. I said, Jim what? Jim Thorpe. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, is this the real Jim Thorpe?
Yeah.
Anyway, I followed him, but as I advanced him in that life farther and farther to the time when he was in the Olympics, and then also he was telling me about how they were trying to take his medals away from him because they said that he had played baseball for money. I guess he played one game and got a few dollars, and they were going to use that against him. At any rate, he was very much on the button with everything he was saying. And I thought, wow, this is really good, as I validated everything. But then after we got into his private life and farther up in years and so on, everything got all screwed up. And it wasn't right. And I thought, well, is this him or isn't it? And it bothered me for a few years. And then one day, one of the spirit guides, and they do this occasionally, spirit guide said, I have a gift for you. And I thought, wow, that's nice. And the gift was this explanation of a phenomenon she called, the walkthrough phenomenon. And she says an individual can look at the Akashic records and pick a lifetime they would like to join for just a short period of time to learn a specific lesson through a specific perspective. And they would do this and then leave. And then I said, well, do they need the permission of the other soul? She says, absolutely, they have to have the permission of the other soul. And she says, usually these are very famous people, high profiles. And I said, why? And she says, because that's where the action is. That's where the challenges are. And so what I found out since that time is that many of these individuals who are very famous have many souls within them. And some of them are there on just a temporary basis. They're there for a short time, and then they leave, and then they do a permanent incarnation. And like I said, we're never going to know how it all works.
No.
But I'm getting these little pieces of the puzzle. And I had a gal who was Joan of Arc. And I ran through that lifetime right into her death, being burned at the stake. And she had several souls within her. And to me, that was a corroboration of what I was being told. So, I mean, I'm getting this information from the other side. And other people, they have an individual they channel to, one particular individual. I'm channeling to thousands, I'm getting all this information.
Yeah.
And some of these guides are very, very high level. They're almost master spirit level, which is very high in the hierarchy of the afterlife. And Brian Weiss mentions those as well. And they're very real. I mean, I had a master, where occasionally you run into this master spirit stuff. And Brian Weiss would communicate with them through the patient, and he would get very unbelievable information that would come through that only nobody could possibly know, things about him and so on. Well, I had one particular patient who had a master spirit that was her guide, and his name was Rohalman, and I would ask him all kinds of questions. I mean, I'd get great information. Tell me about the pyramids or cryogenics or cloning and things of that nature. But one one day, a few months later, I had another master spirit come about, and just for the heck of it, I said, "Is there a Rohalaman among you?" And he said, "No." I said, "Okay," so I just forgot about it. A few months later, this other patient's back, and Rohalaman's back on the scene again, and the first thing I hear is, "I understand you were looking for me through someone else." And the hair goes up in the back of my neck. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, they are real. They know what's going on, you know.
That's incredible.
It's not a bunch of hooey.
And how far have you gone in the future with some patients?
Oh, that varies. I'll oftentimes take people into future lifetimes. It can be in the year 3000 something or whatever. But when I do, in my book, I think, if you notice, I talked about that, and I have a consistency of information coming through regarding certain years, like transportation, vehicles that would hover. And I think it was something like 2040s where vehicles were designed so they would actually hover. And then it was like 2080, the vehicles now were at much higher altitudes, and individuals would be parking them outside their high-rise apartments. You know? And in fact, I had one recently that, again, we ran into the same situation. The guy's talking about these hovering vehicles, only now he's on the freeway with it, or some kind of a freeway, and I guess there was, like, he mentioned sensors on the sides of the vehicle so that you cannot veer off the road, and he's saying, but you got to be careful. You can't just jump over another car by hovering. He said, because the cops will get you. It was really funny. But, I mean, it's very real, you know, and it's consistent. You know, they're saying the same thing. Atlantis, same thing. I get a lot of consistent stories about the destruction of Atlantis.
And was there any sort of like Nostradamus predictions in the future where we're sort of, you know, mass leaving the Earth in a sense because of war?
I get a lot of different thoughts from the spirit guides, and it's not all good information. I mean, definitely something in the near future will occur. I'm not sure what, but it's going to be it could just be a spiritual, fantastically huge spiritual enlightenment, or it may be related to this 2012 situation, the polar shifts. I'm just not sure. I don't get real specific information, but little bits here and there.
Right.
That are telling us that something's definitely going to happen. I'm not sure what.
Okay.
Maybe they don't want us to know what.
That's right. There could be that as well. And do you get much ET contact from regressions? I mean, do people end up other planets?
Well, I've done several individuals who've supposedly been abducted by ETs, and I get very specific information. It's many times a very tearful thing, and when they're being experimented upon. I just had a recent individual, and this is a matter of a week ago, who this lady, she's older, almost 80 actually, but when she was in her 40s, she had a laparoscopic tubal ligation, and I did a lot of those. And when I did those, and she said when that was done on her, it was the same thing. There was absolutely no scar, because what we do is we make the incision very small, way inside the umbilicus, so that, you know, you never see any scar whatsoever.
Yeah.
And then when she was in her 60s, she said one morning she woke up with pain in her belly, and she looked at her belly button, and there was a scar there. And I had her show me the scar, and it was like a vertical and a horizontal together. Even now, it's still there. She didn't know where it came from, but it took weeks for that to heal. And the thing that made it very interesting is I took some attachments off of her, but 3 of those attachments were extraterrestrials. And I've seen those many times. And I often ask them, you know, what's your purpose here? And it's usually experimentation. And that was exactly what they said. I ended up removing an extraterrestrial off a guy, about a year ago, I think, maybe more, who his father had brought him in because he's a kid, he's 32, I think. He was psychotic, he was bipolar, and constantly had this discomfort in his epigastrium, in central part of his chest and from his abdomen. And I asked this ET, I said, what's your purpose in being here? And this one said, I feed off his energy. And I said, where? And he's telling me right there where he's having all this abdominal pain.
Yeah.
Then he volunteered the fact, he says, I also do mind experiments on him. And that explained to me the psychosis and the bipolarity. At any rate, it took a while to get rid of that one. I had used some specific techniques, but I finally got rid of them. And about 9 months later, I talked to his father and said, how's he doing? He said, why don't you talk to him? So then I called him up, and he hadn't been on medication for, I think, a month after I had seen him. He's perfectly fine, no more discomfort, no more psychotic behavior, nothing. So all I can tell you is that
incredible.
I get a lot of good results, and it makes me feel really good. And this is not nonsense,
No.
Some people just get so caught up with the fact that we are in the physical world, and there's no such thing as spirits, there's no such thing as extraterrestrials. I'm sorry, guys, but it's very real. And I was very conventional, and I'm not doing this to impress people. I get a lot of people think I'm off the deep end, but it's very real.
Of course.
It's very therapeutic.
Of course.
I mean, people are able, and the reason I give lectures to the doctors at the hospital is because I think they ought to incorporate this in their cancer programs. Because I am convinced every illness across the board, whether it be emotional or a physical illness, has an emotional cause. And once you expose that emotional cause, once you air it out and bring it up to the conscious mind to observe and make an objective decision on and make a distinction of time on, you're able to release the effect. And bingo, one of the good things that happens is the immune system comes back.
Yeah.
If the immune system comes back, then the chemotherapy and radiation can do a much better job, and these people don't die. So to me, it's across the board. It's very helpful.
Sure. What about people who can't be regressed? I mean, do you come across that often?
Yeah, and Brian always mentions that too, and there's like 10% that don't regress. I've run into some of these, but I'm of the opinion that there's a way to get through those, and I think a lot of the reasons they don't regress is there are dark entities present who somehow cloud up the area. In other words, I cannot get to the spirit guide either in those situations. And I've had to not be able to help some of these people. Although I've decided to get some help from spirit guides, and I ran into this master guide just recently, and I asked that question. I said, what is the reason I can't get through? And he says, well, they somehow cloud up the area so the guide cannot hear or see you and this kind of thing, and so they keep you. In other words, these dark entities are pretty powerful. At any rate, I said, what can I do about this? And I got this is crazy, but he said to me, call me. I said, you're going to help me through somebody else? He said, just call me. Now, I did that yesterday. I had a patient, couldn't get through again, couldn't get the guide, and I just called that particular spirit guide, and son of a gun, he showed. And he did the monitoring for me. So I may end up calling all these people back and saying, I got an answer for you,
That's incredible. But what do you...
I never stop learning.
Yeah, no, that's right. But what do you think about the people...
And that's amazing.
Sure.
Pardon?
Sorry, I was saying, what do you think about the people who are regressed, then turn around and say, well, I didn't want to make you feel funny, but I just didn't come up with anything, but they didn't feel anything yet. They just feel that they've come up with an elaborate story while you were there.
No, but occasionally somebody will say, well, I don't even know if I was hypnotized, that kind of thing. Well, you remember the conscious mind is fully awake. I can usually tell if somebody is under well and becomes deeper and so on. Very rarely is anybody able to fake me out on that score. But the individual will usually be very honest if they, sometimes they can't shut off their mind. If you're thinking some other thoughts and you're not following what I'm asking and saying, then you're not cooperating.
Okay.
So you've got to be motivated, you got to be cooperative, but you just have to kind of go with it. don't resist, don't force, just go with it.
Go with it, yeah.
I'll use, a lot of your senses, and I'll relate certain places and just be there and listen carefully to what I'm saying, and you'll fall right into this hypnotic state, which is an altered state of consciousness.
Charles, how would you class parallel lives? How would you describe that to someone, and what is it?
Well, that's a very interesting situation, these parallel lifetimes. And I've had several individuals who've had these type things, but the parallel life it occurs when the soul divides into two or more bodies, so as to learn lessons from usually an entirely different perspective. So in other words, the same soul can occupy two or more bodies in one incarnation, or sometimes the incarnations overlap. Many times I'll ask them if they do have a parallel life, and I will ask the spirit guide these things. And I'll say, is there one currently? And I had one that was current, and what I did then is, and I didn't know if it would work or not, but I said, do you think you can get into the mind of this other person? And I waited for a while, and sure as heck, within about 5 minutes, she was in that individual's mind, and turns out that this guy was a lawyer, and he was living in California, and was very depressed and sad. And I said, well, why? He said, well, I guess he's going through a divorce, and just all kinds of stuff was going on. But what I did then is very interesting. I said, well, advance to the next morning when you go out and get the mail. Now read me the address. And I was able to pinpoint this guy.
Incredible.
But I mean, it's amazing what you can do,
But would you say there's would you say there's parallel lives on other Earth worlds just like this one, but just with a 2% difference in what's, in the situation that we're going through now?
Well, I think we do live in multiple dimensions in terms of many in other words, as we're talking now, we may be talking in several different situations. And there are some theoretical physicists like David Duscher who are very, very fond of this theory. So yeah, that's a strong possibility. As far as dimensions and other planets and so on, I can't answer that question, but I do know that I've run into everything practically, and I'm just open because I don't know what's going to, what I'm going to find.
And do you believe our pets have past lives as well? Do you believe pets come back?
If you looked in my book, if you remember, I took people back to the very first existence just to see what would happen, and many of them came in as animals to begin with, and then they would advance to more complicated animals, and then eventually to primitive man. But it was really interesting because as they did all this, they weren't really considered a true soul. They were like an essence of a soul, and the master spirits would call the shots in terms of when they would incarnate and so on, even into primitive man. But it wasn't until primitive man learned the lesson of love that they were actually now able to be considered a full soul and call their own shots on when to incarnate and where and so on.
And I suppose you wouldn't go back as an animal. I mean, you can't choose a life to come back as an animal, because I wouldn't say that's not.
I don't know.
Well, that's not.
I honestly do not know.
I wouldn't class that as progression.
I would think that's going backwards.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I don't think so. But
no.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm open to anything, like I said.
Sure. No, that's right.
But what I do find out though makes a lot of sense. So.
And Charles, what's your website to give to the audience?
It's called hypnoregression.com.
Okay.
HYPNO regression, all one word, .com.
We'll put a link for that onto the webpage, and we'll also put a link to your book to amazon.co.uk if you want to order Charles's book. Well, Charles, I want to thank you very much for the phone in today.
You got it.
And I hope you can come back on in the future.
Well, I appreciate your having me on, Kev.
To find out more information on Dr. Charles Traymont, just visit his website, which is hypnoregression.com. That's HYPNO regression.com. themoreshow.com or visit my website, themoreshow.co.uk, and look up Charles Traymont under past guests. Now you can also follow us on Facebook. Just go to the Facebook group and you'll be able to find out all the latest information on upcoming shows. And don't forget that we have a TV show which starts on the 10th of June on Sky 201 and FreeSat 403. So until next time, be safe.
Visit themoreshow.co.uk/shop to purchase products and services from your favourite past guests. If you're new to this site, you can also catch up on the previous television and radio shows through YouTube and the More Show website.